Luke 5:33 through 39. They asked him, "John's disciples are well known for keeping fast and saying prayers, also the Pharisees, but you seem to spend most of your time at parties. Why?" Jesus said, "When you're celebrating a wedding, you don't skimp on the cake and wine. You feast. Later, you may need to exercise moderation, but this isn't the time. As long as the bride and groom are with you, you have a good time. When the groom is gone, the fasting can begin. No one throws cold water on a friendly bonfire. This is kingdom come. No one cuts up a fine silk scarf to patch old working clothes. You want fabric that matches. And you don't put wine in old cracked bottles. You get strong, clean bottles for your fresh vintage wine. And no one who has ever tasted fine aged wine prefers unaged wine."
Good morning again. A little about me that maybe you know or don't know. I grew up from time I was 2 years old until I was in first part of 6th grade in a little town in Indiana called Covington, Indiana. And so it's a little hard to see in this picture, but so here's Covington. That's the Covington part of it. This is the Wabash River. And all of this around here is cornfields. Lots and lots of corn. Covington was a town of 3,000 people. And I did a little bit of stat searching this week. And so in my little town of 3,000 people, 97.6% was white. We were about as white of a town as you could possibly imagine. And I was actually a little surprised by this. I didn't really know. But we're a pretty affluent town. And so 4% live below the poverty line. And so only 96% of us, as I said, were above the poverty line. So fairly affluent, white, small farm town. And in a town like this, we considered things like this to be salad. So if you said, "Hey, can you bring a salad when you come over for dinner?" it's very likely they might bring something like this. In case you were wondering, here is the ingredients to this salad. There is 3.4 ounces of instant vanilla pudding mix. There is 3.5 cups of whole milk, that's a little healthy, right? You need your dairy. 8 ounces of Cool Whip. 6 Granny Smith apples, which are healthy, by the way. 6 full Snicker bars. And just optional, a 1/4 cup of caramel sauce, if you happen to want that. So question, do you think me growing up in that little town, white, Midwest, farm community, fairly affluent, eating Snickers bars for salad, do you think that had an effect on me? Do you think at some level that shaped the way in which I viewed the world? Do you think that there was some sort of a normal that was created, that this is the way the world is, that was shaped by my teachers, by my neighbors, by my pastors, by the people that I grew up around? Today we're going to talk about the idea of paradigm and worldview. And all of you could share your own story. We don't have time now, but this would be a great thing in your community group. All of you could share the story about where you grew up. And very similarly, wherever you grew up, I'm sure had a profound effect on how you viewed the world. I grew up in that little town till I was in 6th grade. October of my 6th grade year, my family moved, and we moved from my little farm town of Covington, Indiana. We moved to Tampa, Florida. And I was enrolled in Elkhart Elementary School at 1807 Dr. Martin Luther King Drive Boulevard. So the way that school systems worked in Tampa at that time, they separated grades by whole schools. And so Elkhart Elementary School was a school for just sixth graders. It was just sixth graders in the entire school, and there was 3,000 sixth graders in my school of Elkhart Elementary School. So I went from a town of 3,000 people to a school of just 3,000 sixth graders. In our neighborhood in Tampa, only 17% of the population was white. And in the place in which we now lived and we called home, over 20% of the population lived below the poverty line. Do you think that all of a sudden the worldview and paradigm that I was given in Covington, Indiana, do you think that the worldview that I was now experiencing at Elkhart Elementary School, do you think those worldviews could be different? Do you think there was some conflict between the way in which I had always been told the world operated to now as I was experiencing a very different way that the world operated? And again, we could go around and all of you have your own story. You at some point as you were growing up, you met a new friend, you got a new neighbor, you went to college, you watched a documentary, you read a book, you traveled outside the country. You had some sort of a moment in your life where all of a sudden your very kind of like clear black and white version of the world all of a sudden was like, there was like tension between it. Because like the worldview that you were handed all of a sudden didn't comprehend with the worldview that you were now experiencing. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We are going through the book of Luke all this next year. And one of the agendas that Luke has and one of the agendas that I have throughout the book of Luke is we want you to see that Jesus is offering a worldview. Jesus is offering a paradigm of how he wants us to see the world. And many times the worldview that Jesus is giving us is at odds with the worldview that we experience in other places. And we're trying to figure out how do we choose between the worldview that Jesus is offering us and the worldview that is anywhere else. And this is a huge deal. Way we'll say it is the worldview that Jesus is giving us is this worldview that literally affects everything. This isn't something that's to be tacked on to our other worldviews. This isn't okay, I kind of have the way that I'm doing things and I can figure out how I can add some of this Jesus stuff into it. The idea is that when you start following Jesus and you accept the worldview that he is giving, that it literally changes and affects everything that we do. The way we talk about it around here is that when you decide that you want to follow Jesus, it's this way of saying, I'm going to surrender everything in my life to Jesus, and I'm going to let him be in charge. That I'm going to live an open-handed life, and I'm going to say, whatever Jesus wants me to do, whatever he wants me to give, that's what I'm going to give. And I'm going to fully join Jesus in his mission. And that's like a clash of worlds. So the story that we're looking at today, Luke chapter 5, and this is kind of like part 2 to what we looked at last week. And so in the story we looked at last week, Jesus is having, this is like the way we talk about it, been talking about it over the last little bit. It's this conflict between Christianity and Jonathanianity. That I have my way of how I think the world should work. I have my way that my parents explained to me how the world works. I have my way that the books and podcasts that I listen to reaffirm to me that this is how the world is going to work. And some of that could be good and some of that could be bad. But there's a conflict often with the way that Jesus is calling me to live, to how I want to live, and to how I think the world should be. And it's this battle, just trying to figure, am I going to let myself win, or am I going to let Jesus win? All right. Now, Luke 5, next part of the story. Last week, we looked at this story where Jesus is having dinner with a tax collector. And this would have been just a huge paradigm conflicting idea, because they had all this idea that like, if you are a good Jewish person, here's who you're supposed to eat with, here's who you're supposed to spend time with. And then if you're like a Jewish teacher, rabbi, here's especially who you should spend time with, who you should eat with. And then if you're claiming to be the Messiah, if you're claiming to be the Son of God, definitely we had strict categories of these are the kind of people that you should be spending time with. Here's who God would want to be close to. And especially, here's who God would want to call to be his closest disciples to kind of lead his movement. And there was like this huge paradigm busting thing where all of a sudden Jesus is eating with tax collectors. And not just some tax collectors, but many tax collectors and many sinners. And like the people are just trying to like figure this out. Like, what does this mean? Like we were always told like hang out with good people and this good guys hanging like what do we do with this? This is very different than like this is changing our minds about who we should spend time with. And so that's kind of last week. This week now, this is kind of the continuation of this story. It says they, and we don't actually know who they is. Some people think it was the Pharisees, the teachers of the law. Some people think it was just some other people that were at the party, but we don't really know. But somebody said, hey, John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours go on eating and drinking. And they kind of had this like notice of like, okay, we've been watching, and we see, okay, here's how the Pharisees and religious leaders, here's how the world, the paradigm that they operate in. And here's how John the Baptist, they kind of like operate in the same way. But like your followers seem to be acting in very different ways. And that's kind of the first thing I want us to get, is that there's something about the way in which people follow Jesus that it was like noticeable that people who follow Jesus are living different than other different religious leaders. And for some of us, that's actually a really like good idea. I've known multiple different friends in my life now who have kind of like started to like kind of reject the idea of like when someone says like, hey, are you a Christian? Are you a religious person? Are you an evangelical? Are you a born again? They kind of like, yeah, I don't know if I want to like accept that title, because there's like baggage that goes along with it. Like we feel like here's how evangelicals act. Here's how people that claim to be born again act. And some of that's good and some of that's bad. And so instead they'll say, I'm not necessarily in that category. I'm in the category of I am a Jesus follower. And it's interesting, even as I've like explained that to like some friends, folks that aren't necessarily Christians yet, there's kind of this idea of like, oh yeah, like I get that. Like I see that like someone who was like really following Jesus would probably act different than what I sometimes align with like general religious people or general church people. And there's something about how people saw Jesus. They saw that here's how all these other religious people were acting, but there's something about how these Jesus followers are acting that's just, it's different. It's just, they're operating out of a different worldview, a different paradigm. And one of the things that they saw that they were doing differently was this idea of fasting. And so by fasting, Jesus and disciples weren't apparently fasting. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they never fasted. We were told just a little bit ago in the book of Luke that Jesus fasted for 40 days. And so we know that Jesus fasted. Jesus wasn't against fasting. They had yearly times where the whole nation of Israel, especially at the Day of Atonement, where the whole nation would fast. And surely Jesus' disciples probably would have fasted during those times. But what most people think is that what his disciples weren't doing is there's kind of been a tradition that had developed over the last couple years where the Pharisees and apparently other different people were fasting sometimes 2 or 3 times every single week. And the reason why they were fasting was it was kind of out of this like posture of like sadness and waiting and hoping. As we've talked about before, in the nation of Israel, it was very difficult times 2,000 years ago. The Roman Empire was kind of occupying. There was Roman soldiers walking the street, lots of violence, heavy taxation, very difficult financially. And these were hard, sad times. And so there was this whole feeling in Israel at this time where everyone was like sad because of the way the world was. And then they were waiting and hoping for someday God to send his long-awaited Messiah. And there was thought that when God sent the Messiah, that was going to make everything right. And so all these different people, every single week, were taking time just to fast, just as a way of just letting God know how serious they were. Just, we're so sad. We are so discontent with how the world is. And we're just, God, waiting. Come on, do your thing. Finally make the world right. And they noticed, they're not doing that. They're not spending their lives being sad. They're not spending their lives waiting. Well, what's up with that? Why aren't they doing that? And here's what Jesus said. He said, Jesus answered, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? And bridegroom was a term that all the Jewish people then would have known. That was a term for the waited for Messiah. And so this is another instance, and there's been multiple instances so far in Luke, and there's going to be a lot more later on, where Jesus kind of has the audacity to claim that long-awaited for Messiah, who you've been waiting for to put everything back together. Ta-da! I'm him. I'm here right now. And so that would have been a paradigm shift, that we're not waiting anymore because the Messiah is right here. And then there would have been this huge paradigm shift because they had an image of here's what the Messiah is going to be like. When the Messiah comes, here's what the Messiah is going to do. And Jesus just didn't fit so many of those categories. So now they're trying to figure out what that whole thing looked like. Another little bit of little paradigm shift in here. And I love this idea that one of the things that they saw about Jesus was that he was regularly eating and drinking. And that was just when you thought of Jesus, what's Jesus doing? What's the disciples doing? I bet they're at how Claire read it in her version. They're at a party somewhere. Jesus is just a party person. And what an amazing cool paradigm shift is that? I don't know how many times people think of man, if we're gonna have a party, we need to invite some people that are gonna really get this thing going. Who are the real people that if they get there, it's all right, game on. This thing's gonna be epic. I know what we should do. We should go around to all the churches and get all of them to come because those are the people that just so many times churches are known as stoic, sad, serious, and what an amazing paradigm shift of this is who Jesus was. Jesus hung out at parties. Jesus ate really good food. He drank really good things. Jesus was someone who was all about celebration. And shouldn't we be about people of celebration? And I just love that kind of paradigm shift. But I think for these folks that are asking this question, this is a little bit about fasting. But this is a lot of they're just trying to figure out this whole thing. Okay, we have our little worldview, we have our paradigm, and this Jesus character is just it just doesn't mesh into what we've always thought was the way it was. And what do we do with that? And so Jesus gives two analogies or two metaphors or two parables. And here's what he says. He says he told them this parable. No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise, they will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new will not match the old. And I think that genuinely makes sense to most of us. We're doing a ton of work right now. We have a new building that we're buying as a church, and then we've been doing a lot of yard work at my house right now. And so I found that I'm going back and forth between what I call my work jeans and my nice jeans. I don't know if any of you guys have something like that. But I have in my drawer, I have a pair of work jeans that they have paint on them and they have holes in them and they're stained. And if I have to lay down in the grass, if I have to get sawdust, these are my work jeans. I don't really care that much about them. And then I'm wearing my nice jeans, huh? Pretty good, yeah, thank you. And so it'd be a little bit crazy, right? If I was working at the building sometime this week and I was walking past something and I ripped a pair of my work jeans, and I'm oh man, my work jeans just got ripped. I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go cut up my new Sunday jeans, and I'm gonna cut a piece out of my nice jeans to patch the old ones. It just doesn't really make sense, and that's kind of Jesus' metaphor there. And then he gives another one. He says, and no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the new wine will burst the skins, and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No new wine must be poured in. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. This might not be quite as familiar. I don't know if anyone's like made wine or kombucha or kind of anything that ferments. But as I'm told, I haven't done it. When you like make wine or make anything that's going to ferment, then it creates like gas as it goes. So it expands. And so if you just put it in a jar and like seal the jar, then it would like break the jar because like the gas would just expand. And so a lot of times if you make something like that, you put like cheesecloth on it or you put something so the air can escape, apparently. In that day, what they would do 2,000 years ago is they would get animal skins and they would like put the wine in there, and animal skin has like a certain amount of elasticity. And so as you put the new wine in there, then it would ferment and it would expand, and the wine would have room to expand, the gases would have room to expand, and then the skin itself would kind of stretch out. But if you took a wine skin that had already been used in that process and put new wine in there, it can only like stretch so far. So if you fill up an old one and that expansion happens, it's going to break it and it's going to burst. And the idea behind both these is the idea that if you take something that's old, something that's kind of like this has already been used, and you try to just add something new into it, it's not going to match. It's going to end up like busting this whole thing. And this is the tension that I think a lot of us find when it comes to the idea of following Jesus, is that we all have our old worldview, what we were given as a kid, what we have kind of developed throughout life, what we have learned through like philosophy classes. We kind of have our old, here's like our little system. And then we have this like decision of like, are we going to just like try to like tack some of this Jesus stuff on, or are we going to let Jesus reshape this whole thing? And what Jesus says is that if you like start to like explore what Jesus is actually saying, if you go, as we go through the book of Luke this year, as you look at all these ways in which Jesus is actually trying to tell us to live, then if we just try to like shove that into our old life, either it's not going to match, or it's going to like completely just like disrupt everything else in our life. And I think that like disrupting and breaking is actually the best analogy, because at some level, Jesus is saying this is like a warning that like if you do this, then like it could break. But I think for a lot of us, our stories is that like this is what we have done, and now we are experiencing like somewhere in the process of the tension of like we have our old way of seeing the world, and now we're putting more and more Jesus stuff into it, and we're feeling the stretch, and in some level we're feeling that old system that we used to have, still have to some degree, we're feeling it start to break and burst apart. There's a whole line of philosophy that some of you might be more familiar with than me called stage theory, and it's like how our minds end up changing. And there's different ways that people explain it, but some of the biggest kind of categories are this kind of general idea that when your paradigms are being changed, you move in these different categories. And so you often start with something that's very simplistic, very black and white. This is the way the world is. All people act like this. All people of this race have this kind of stereotype. All people that live in this country are like this. This is the way in which you just kind of have this very like black and white, here's the way the world works. And then at some level, you move from Covington to Tampa, you go to college, you read your book, now all of a sudden you have a black friend, you have a gay friend, you have a straight friend, you have a rich friend, you have a poor friend, you live in a different country, and all of a sudden that very tight worldview you had, there's like complexity in it. Because you're like, what I was always told doesn't seem to be mixing with the reality that I'm actually having right now. And we like have that tension. And then, if you let it, all of a sudden your old worldview starts to kind of like deconstruct and start to fall apart. And this happens across the board. So we talk about our different like spiritual practices here. Of like, okay, like we talk about the idea of like Sabbath and taking like a regular week off. It's like, oh, I have here's my way in which I do my schedule, and I could just sort of like tack on that I'm going to now I'm going to just start having a Sabbath in there. But as you find that if you don't change anything else in your old worldview, in your old schedule, and you sort of tack on this new thing, then at some point you're like, this isn't working. This is making the old thing fall apart. And if I'm going to actually really adopt this new thing, then I'm going to have to let parts or maybe the whole of my old schedule, my old philosophy completely fall apart. And this is the same for every part of life. And I think that this is part of what Jesus is getting to, is that whatever your old way of looking at things, Jesus wants you to gently and lovingly let it burst apart and be broken for the new thing. I want to read you a quote. So back in 2020, where the world was completely being changed and a lot of our paradigms and worldviews were being upended, Ashley and I got a chance to go to a conference. Actually, it was that next year in 2021. And there was a speaker there by the name of Stephanie Spellers, Reverend Stephanie Spellers, a fantastic person. And she presented this idea of what do we do when the way in which we had always seen the world is starting to fall apart? And the things that made so much sense to us now, we're feeling I don't know if that actually is working anymore. And what do I do with that? And here's what she had to say. She said it was Saturday, August 1st, 2020. And I know that because my text log tells me so. And that afternoon, I wrote to a friend. God is breaking open this church and is pouring us out. Pouring out the privilege, pouring out empire, pouring out racism and human arrogance in order to remake us and use us to serve God's dream for the whole world. We are a broken jar. It hurts and it sucks. And I think it's a gift. You and your church are holding a beautiful jar. And you are used to grasping it with both hands, tilting and pouring the contents with moderation, though carefully crafted spout. Someday, you will have to break it open so the contents flow free, or God will do it for you. You and your church, you think loving a thing means protecting it and maintaining it exactly as it was handed to you. Someday, you will understand what it means to love something enough to let it crack apart and just sit with the pieces. And notice what needs to be removed for good, and then faithfully piece back together what matters most to make something more whole, something more like what God intended all along. And that's the process that I think that God wants to do in every single one of our lives. He wants to take every single one of our beliefs, every single one of our paradigms, every single one of our, this is the way that I've always handled money, I've always handled my time, this is the way I've always viewed people. And I think he wants us to lovingly smash it and then allow him to remake it into something brand new, into his own vision. Real quick, I want to talk about the idea of new. What does Jesus mean when he says he wants to do something new in our lives? Because sometimes this can be misunderstood on different levels. And so sometimes this can be interpreted as, because Jesus, in our Bibles, I should have brought my Bible up here. In the Bible, there's two different big sections called the Old Testament and the New Testament. And Jesus is kind of the beginning of the New Testament, and the Old Testament is all the story of Israel. And so sometimes people will interpret this as saying that Jesus came to bring something new, and the Old Testament, he wanted to get rid of because the Old Testament is bad. And so is that what Jesus is saying? Is that kind of everything that God had been doing in the nation of Israel and all the rules and all the laws, that was all bad, and now he's trying to do something new? Or is he saying that whatever was in your old life, whatever it was in your old paradigm, is he saying that everything about that is broken and messed up and needs to be destroyed, and you need to kind of get rid of that old, and so that way you can have something new? Or is he saying something different? one way to kind of think about it is, was Jesus wanting to do a revolutionary movement or a renewal movement? Was Jesus trying to kind of take everything that was old and say and do something brand new, something like revolutionary, different than what the world had ever seen? Or was Jesus trying to do something that was a renewal movement, as he was saying, this thing has gotten messed up and broken, but like somewhere if we like work, if we restore, we can go back to the way it was originally supposed to be? Was Jesus trying to bring back the original intent of what it was always supposed to be? Or was Jesus trying to do something brand new? And if you've been around here for a little while, then you probably know the answer. The answer is yes. Let's look at some of the quick ways that Jesus talked about this idea of new. So later on in Luke, he's going to say this. We're going to do this in a little bit when we practice communion. So in the same way, after supper, he took the cup and said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Was Jesus presenting something that was a new covenant, that was brand new for the whole world? Yes. Was he also showing what the covenant was always supposed to be? Yes. In 2 Corinthians, a guy named Paul said, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come." And is Jesus saying that he wants to make you into a brand new creation? Yes. And is he saying that he wants to make you into the creation you were always supposed to be? Yes. Or I think one of the best ones in John, this is at the Last Supper, when Jesus is practicing the Last Supper with his disciples. He looked at them and he said, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." Was that something that was like radically new? Was that something that like, if you like scour the pages of the Old Testament, is there nothing in there about loving other people? No. Actually, Jesus said the whole Old Testament is exactly about that. This was about something that was old and something that is new. And so I think that makes what Jesus, that's kind of our idea that there was a plan of what God always wanted it to be. It's gone terribly wrong, and God, and through Jesus, wants to bring us back to what it was originally supposed to be, which then I think helps make sense, this last line of this text we're looking at today, where he says, "And no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better." This isn't like the new is great and the old is bad. Jesus is pro-old. He's pro-Old Testament, and he's pro a lot of the old things that happen to be in your life. And at the same time, he wants to revolutionize it. Another little twist on this part that I think is pretty cool. Again, I'm not much of a wine person, but what I have heard is that in general, that's true. Old wine is better than new wine. But it also kind of depends. And so just if you just took a bottle of $5 wine, or if you just got some box wine and kept it for 150 years, just because it's old doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be awesome, because it started as kind of marginal wine, and the older it got, it might get a little bit better, but it was never really that great to begin with. And I think what Jesus is saying is, I love how the Message translates this. He talks about this idea of fresh vintage wine. Because, again, from what I've heard about winemaking, there's sometimes when, as you're harvesting the grapes and as you're mashing them, and it's you're putting in the bottle, there's this automatic thought of this is going to be awesome. This is really amazing wine. And as we store it and as it ages, it's only going to get better. This is starting really great, and the longer it sits, the better it's going to get. And I think that's so much of the way of Jesus, is Jesus wants to do something new in your life. And as you begin to accept the ways of Jesus, as you begin this new paradigm of Jesus, from the get-go, it's good. The first day you start to live in the way of Jesus, it's good. The first week you start to live in the way of Jesus, it's good. But the longer it sits, the longer you live in this direction, and the more you pass it on to your kids and then to their kids, and the longer this just moves on as a revolution, the better and better it gets. And that's this new thing that Jesus wants to do in your life. So, a couple questions as we end today. Question number one. What new thing is God doing in your life? What, maybe just today, maybe it's been for the last couple days, maybe it's been for the last couple weeks, but you've been feeling this push of this thing that God wants you to do different. Or maybe it's a way in which God wants you to view the world differently. Or maybe it's a way that he wants you to view yourself differently. Maybe it's a way he wants you to view other people differently. But you just feel that there's this way that here's been my little paradigm, and you just have this feeling that God has been challenging you to do something different. Think different. Have a different frame of mind, different heart. Is there anything that God has been challenging you with? And then, second question, what tension is that causing? I think two of the biggest things that God can challenge us with is how we think about people, how we think about our time and how we spend our time, and how we think about and how we spend our money. And if God starts to challenge ourselves in one of those ways, and it could be many other ways, then here's the way we've always done it. God's putting this new thing, and it's just creating tension. Because if I invite those people in, if I start to spend my money that way, it's going to really shake things up and change things. If I start to spend my time that way, that's literally me taking my schedule and throwing it on the ground and it all shattering. Because I don't even know, my current schedule doesn't fit at all with that new thing that God is telling me to do. What's the tension that you are feeling in that? And then here's my encouragement, again from Reverend Stephanie Spellers, is to take the old thing you're holding on to. And it could be, your parents gave it to you or society gave it to you. I get it, some good things in there. But someday, maybe today's that day, maybe you will understand what it means to love something enough. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for teaching me this. Thank you, Covington Elementary School. Thank you, Elkhart Elementary School. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Professor, for teaching me this. And thank you, I love it. But I love it enough now to crack it apart. And now I'm just going to sit with the pieces. And I'm going to notice that there's some things out of that system I was given to, maybe with good intent, maybe with bad intent, that need to be removed for good. Those just do not fit into the new thing. And then faithfully piece together what matters most to make something more whole and something more like what God intended all along. Let's pray. Jesus, I pray that you are moving as you do in our minds and hearts right now, and that you are bringing things to our minds and to our hearts. And that you are challenging our notions of how we should live and how we should think. And that you are boldly asking for us to change. You are asking for, instead of it being our own way and being Jonathan-ianity, to letting this be your way and to actually letting you take lordship, kingship, messiahship over this thing. Help us to let go of those things. I also, as we get ready to sing this next song, I pray for some of us because we're kind of maybe even on the other end of this whole thing. So we had our way in which the world was operating, and we've lived in the tension. And now we're just kind of in that deconstructed phase. and just, our whole world and everything what we once believed, and it's just kind of like all out there, and it's all shattered, and it's just, we just don't even know like how to make of it anymore. Like, this is not the way that we always thought the world was going to be, and this is not how we always thought God was going to be. And we're just trying to like fit with like how, what do we put back together? What is actually real and what is really true? And so I pray that you be with us in that process, to allow the things that have fallen away, that need to fall away, to stay on the ground and to end up in the trash pile. And for the things that need to be picked back up and to recreate this new worldview, this new theology, this new philosophy that is you-centered. Give us the wisdom and faithfulness to be able to do that well. So we pray.